Welcome to Sleepy Scholar, where time slows down and history becomes a lullaby. Come sit beside me here by the crackling fire. The light is low, the world is quiet, and the past is waiting to whisper its stories. Rest your head, get cozy, and let's drift together through the candlelit salons and shadowed battlefields of old Europe, where in the late 18th century, a determined young man from Corsica would rise to shape the destiny of nations. In the quiet folds of the Mediterranean Sea lies the island of Corsica, a rugged and sun-warmed land where the waves roll gently onto rocky shores and the scent of wild herbs drifts through the mountain air. It was here, in the small town of Ajaccio, that Napoleon Bonaparte was born on a warm August day in 1769. The house he entered was modest, yet filled with the rhythms of life. The chatter of siblings, the creak of wooden floors, the rustle of olive trees just beyond the windows. Napoleon's parents, Carlo and Letizia Bonaparte, were of minor nobility, their roots running deep in Corsican soil. Though noble in title, their lives were grounded, not grand or excessive, but proud and full of purpose. Letizia, firm yet nurturing, carried the strength of generations. Carlo, educated and politically inclined, dreamed of possibilities for his growing family in a world that was rapidly changing. Napoleon was the second of 13 children, though not all would live to adulthood. His early days were shaped by the sounds and textures of island life, the distant tolling of church bells, the hum of markets, the salty breeze coming in from the sea. Corsica had only recently become a part of France, and a strong sense of independence still lingered in the hearts of its people. The young boy would have grown up hearing stories of resistance and pride, whispered like lullabies beneath the stars. Though small and wiry, Napoleon was known for his seriousness. He watched more than he spoke, thinking deeply even as a child. He was fond of books, of long walks, of quiet study in corners while others played outside. History, mathematics, and the tales of ancient warriors stirred something in him. Not a thirst for conquest, but a fascination with order, with power, with destiny. At the age of 9, a new chapter began. Napoleon was granted a scholarship to study in France, far from the familiar hills of Corsica. It was a significant change, the first of many departures in his life. In 1779, he left Ajaccio and boarded a ship bound for the mainland. The sea journey was long and silent, filled with thoughts of home and what lay ahead. He arrived at the Royal Military School of Brienne-le-Château, a cold, unfamiliar place nestled in the countryside of northeastern France. There, among children of aristocrats, Napoleon was an outsider. He spoke French with a Corsican accent, was mocked for his modest background, and kept mostly to himself. But he observed always. He studied with quiet intensity, especially in mathematics and history, where the precision of numbers and the sweep of past empires gave him a sense of focus. Winters were long at Brienne, with snow piling against the dormitory windows and candles burning low into the night. In those still hours, while others slept, young Napoleon would read or write letters home. He missed Corsica, its light, its warmth, its rhythms. Yet he also began to understand that his future would not be found on the island, but somewhere beyond the horizon. In time, his diligence was noticed. At 15, he was admitted to the prestigious École Militaire in Paris, where he trained to become an artillery officer. The capital, grand and bustling, was a far cry from Ajaccio. But Napoleon, now a teenager, navigated it with quiet determination. He completed the 2-year program in just 1 year, a sign of his remarkable focus. When his father passed away shortly after, Napoleon assumed responsibility for the family, especially for his younger siblings. Though still very young, he began to carry himself with a gravity beyond his years. His ambition was not loud. It was measured, internal, quietly burning. As the 1780s faded into the 1790s, the world around him began to shift. The French monarchy trembled, ideas of revolution spread, and new possibilities emerged for those willing to seize them. But in these early days, before the chaos and the crowns, Napoleon was simply a boy from Corsica, shaped by the wind and the pines, the pages of history books, and a sense that something greater awaited. And so, the story begins not with battlefields or empires, but with soft island winds and the quiet resolve of a child gazing far beyond the shore. Bonaparte was no longer a boy, but a young officer, quiet, composed, and alert to the shifting winds of history. France was changing. The revolution, like a tide slowly rising, had begun to transform the very structure of society. The old order, with its kings and courtiers, gave way to new voices, sometimes hopeful, sometimes uncertain, yet always restless. Amid this transformation, Napoleon remained steady, observing it all with a thoughtful distance. His path had begun in books and study, and now it continued in boots and barracks. He served as a second lieutenant in the artillery, a branch of the military known for its reliance on calculation and precision. It suited him. The slow arc of a cannonball, the quiet weight of a strategy forming in the mind. These were not chaotic things, but orderly, knowable. His first real post took him to Valence in southeastern France. There, he lived simply, often alone, reading voraciously in the evenings. He studied philosophy, military tactics, and the writings of Enlightenment thinkers. These were not idle interests. They were the building blocks of a vision he was quietly beginning to shape, a sense that he might, one day, guide events rather than simply respond to them. Though young, Napoleon began writing as well. Small treatises on politics, reflections on war, and even short stories. His Corsican heritage remained close to him. For a time, he even dreamed of returning to the island and helping it gain independence from French rule. But the complexities of revolution on the mainland would soon draw him in more fully. In 1793, a turning point arrived. The port city of Toulon, held by royalist forces and supported by the British Navy, became a focal point of the revolution's military efforts. The French government needed to retake it, and Napoleon, then just 24 years old, was appointed to assist in planning the artillery strategy. What he proposed was methodical and sound, positioning the guns on higher ground to control the harbor, cutting off supply lines, and advancing not with bluster, but with care. The plan succeeded. Toulon fell, and Napoleon was noticed. He was promoted to brigadier general, a remarkable rise for someone so young. Yet even in success, he remained calm. There was no boasting, no fanfare, just a quiet return to duty, to study, to thought. The revolution continued to evolve, and so did Napoleon. He navigated its turbulence with caution, never too bold, never too passive, always watching, always learning. For a time he found himself on the fringes of power, suspected by some, reassigned by others. But in 1795, as unrest gripped the streets of Paris once more, his resolve and strategic mind were called upon again. A royalist uprising threatened the city. The government needed order, swift and sure. Napoleon, appointed to command the defense, responded with precision. He arranged his troops and artillery through the streets, choosing positions with a mathematical calm. The fighting that followed was brief and decisive. Order returned. The government was grateful. Once more, Napoleon rose, this time to the rank of commander of the Army of the Interior, and soon after, of the Army of Italy. Italy, distant, mountainous, and historically rich, was not yet the land of conquests. It was a new challenge, a new canvas. Napoleon saw possibilities, not just of battle or victory, but of shaping something lasting. He began to envision himself not just as a soldier, but as a leader in a broader sense, one who might bring stability where there was unrest, clarity where there was confusion. His letters from this period are reflective. He wrote of logistics, of discipline, of the burden of command. He thought deeply about supply chains, about morale, about how a leader must earn respect through both competence and restraint. His soldiers came to trust him. He did not lead from behind. He walked among them, spoke to them, remembered their names. And so the quiet rise continued, not meteoric, not flamboyant, but steady, built on careful choices and unwavering focus. The young man from Corsica had become a figure of real influence, though he remained at heart a thinker, a planner, a student of history's deeper patterns. As the army prepared to cross into Italy, Napoleon stood on the edge of a new chapter. But even now, with power beginning to take shape in his hands, there was no great announcement, no storm of ambition, just the calm before a journey, the quiet breath drawn before the step forward. In the spring of 1796, Napoleon Bonaparte took command of the French army of Italy, a force that was poorly equipped, underfed, and scattered in morale. Yet Napoleon, still only in his 20s, approached the situation not with impatience, but with quiet resolve. He visited the troops personally, spoke to them with gentle encouragement, and promised not only victory, but dignity, a sense of purpose that reached beyond the battlefield. Italy at this time was a patchwork of kingdoms and duchies, some aligned with Austria, others uncertain of where they stood. Napoleon understood the terrain, not just in a geographic sense, but in a political one. He moved quickly, but not rashly. He chose his battles with care, favoring speed, flexibility, and the element of surprise. His leadership was not about brute force, but the graceful interplay of timing, observation, and action. The campaign began in earnest with a series of victories over the Piedmontese and Austrian forces. At Montenotte, Lodi, and Arcole, Napoleon demonstrated not only his skill in tactics, but his ability to inspire. He walked among his men, shared their meals, and wrote dispatches that praised their courage. His words were never overly grand. They were clear, calm, and motivating, like a gentle current carrying the soldiers forward. As the French army moved through northern Italy, cities began to open their gates. Napoleon, careful not to allow his troops to descend into disorder, enforced discipline and order. He visited local leaders, discussed terms with respect, and even took time to admire the architecture and art that surrounded him. In letters, he wrote about the quiet beauty of Italian towns, the play of light on marble, the ancient silence of ruins, the distant tolling of church bells. While his military victories captured headlines in France, Napoleon's mind was also focused on diplomacy. He negotiated with Austrian envoys, spoke of peace, and studied treaties late into the night. To him, victory was not the end of conflict, but a moment in the shaping of a new balance. He saw beyond the battlefield toward a wider vision of order and reform. By 1797, the campaign had forced Austria to the negotiating table. The Treaty of Campo Formio brought an end to the war and secured new territories for France. Napoleon returned to France a celebrated figure, yet he did not boast. Instead, he kept working, planning, writing, thinking about what lay ahead. In his quiet way, he was already preparing for what would come next. His time in Italy had shown not only his military skill, but his ability to govern. He had set up administrations, reformed tax systems, and protected cultural heritage. He saw power not as a tool for conquest, but as a way to bring stability, a belief that would guide him in the years to follow, though always in balance with the realities of politics and ambition. In 1798, a new campaign was planned, not in Europe, but far to the south across the Mediterranean Sea. Napoleon, ever curious and drawn to the unknown, supported an expedition to Egypt. The goal was strategic, to challenge British influence and open new trade routes. But for Napoleon, it was also a journey of discovery. He brought with him not just soldiers, but scholars, scientists, artists, and engineers. Together they would document the ancient land, study its architecture, its climate, its customs. It was a campaign of both war and wonder, though the military results would be mixed, with battles won and fleets lost. The intellectual legacy of the Egyptian expedition would linger. It would inspire studies of history, languages, and culture for generations. While in Egypt, Napoleon remained the calm center of a swirling expedition. He traveled with books, took notes on ruins, and discussed ideas under the desert stars. Even as war raged in the background, he kept a quiet sense of purpose, the pursuit of knowledge, the shaping of thought. But back in Europe, events were moving swiftly. France was once again at war. The political structure at home was unstable. Napoleon, sensing that his presence was needed, left Egypt and returned to France in 1799. His arrival was quiet but significant. The people remembered his victories, his discipline, his vision. The government, weakened and disorganized, struggled to keep control. In the midst of this, Napoleon moved carefully. He did not seize power overnight. He planned, listened, observed, and when the moment came, he stepped forward with calm certainty. In a peaceful transfer, he helped organize a new government, the consulate, and was named first consul. The revolution had begun in chaos, but now it was finding form. Napoleon was no longer just a soldier or a campaigner. He was becoming something more, a statesman, a symbol, a leader of a nation seeking clarity. And still, through it all, he remained measured, thoughtful, and attentive. The journey was far from over, and the foundation was set. By the turn of the century, Napoleon Bonaparte had become first consul of France. Though his rise had been shaped by war, his early years in power were defined more by governance reform and an effort to restore balance. France had endured a decade of revolution, years of uncertainty, upheaval, and shifting leadership. Now, under Napoleon's steady hand, the nation began to settle like soil after a storm. His government focused on clarity and structure. The Napoleonic Code, a civil legal framework, was introduced to bring uniformity across France. It outlined clear laws related to property, civil rights, contracts, and family life. More than just a set of rules, it represented a new way of thinking, one rooted in reason, consistency, and accessibility. The code would go on to influence legal systems across the world, but in its quiet beginnings, it brought a sense of order to the French people. Education was another priority. Napoleon believed in cultivating minds, not just training soldiers. He established secondary schools called lycées, institutions designed to provide structured learning to future administrators, engineers, and leaders. The curriculum emphasized logic, mathematics, and civic values. Through these schools, a generation of young men learned to think not only for themselves, but for their country. In the countryside, Napoleon worked to restore trust in the economy. He reformed the tax system to make it more efficient and less prone to corruption. He founded the Bank of France to stabilize the currency and encouraged infrastructure projects that connected cities, towns, and markets. Roads were built, bridges restored, and canals dredged, not in haste, but with a sense of lasting purpose. Religion, too, found a new place in French life. After years of tension between the state and the Catholic Church, Napoleon negotiated a concordat with the Pope in 1801. The agreement allowed for freedom of religion while recognizing Catholicism as the faith of the majority. It was not a return to old hierarchies, but a quiet balancing act, one that respected belief while upholding the authority of the state. During these years, Napoleon also pursued peace abroad. In 1802, the Treaty of Amiens brought a temporary end to the war with Britain. It was a moment of calm in the long story of conflict, a time when France could breathe, reflect, and rebuild. Napoleon was celebrated not only as a general, but as a reformer, a unifier, a man who brought calm after chaos. His public image began to shift. Portraits showed him not just in military uniform, but in robes of state, seated with dignity, holding symbols of law and governance. He was still young, yet carried himself with the composure of someone older, someone deeply aware of the weight of responsibility. But as the peace wore on, it became clear that tension with Britain would return. Trade disputes, colonial rivalries, and mutual distrust simmered beneath the surface. In 1804, amid this atmosphere, Napoleon took a decisive step. With the support of the Senate and a public referendum, he became Emperor of the French. The coronation, held in Notre Dame Cathedral, was a grand but measured ceremony. It did not mark a return to monarchy in the traditional sense. Rather, it was Napoleon's way of formalizing his role as the guiding figure of a republic transformed. He crowned himself, gently lifting the golden crown and placing it upon his own head, a quiet signal that his authority came not from divine right, but from action, from will, and from the people's consent. The empire, as envisioned by Napoleon, was not one of reckless expansion. It was meant to be a continuation of the revolutionary ideals. But under a centralized, efficient structure, he appointed loyal administrators to govern the provinces, expanded infrastructure, and maintained the reforms he had initiated. In the arts and sciences, he encouraged exploration, commissioning works that blended classical themes with modern vision. Yet, beneath the calm surface, the pressure of Europe's fragile alliances began to build. Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia viewed the rise of Napoleon with increasing concern. Treaties frayed, and the prospect of renewed war loomed once more. Napoleon, though aware of the risk, remained composed. He prepared without fanfare, bolstered his army with careful organization, and continued to govern as if peace would last. He walked through the Tuileries Palace gardens, met with scholars, and reviewed plans for new civic buildings. To those around him, he seemed both deeply present and always thinking several steps ahead. France, under his leadership, had become more than a country recovering from revolution. It had become a state with a vision, one guided by logic, efficiency, and the hope of unity. And though the future held storms, for now, the empire stood firm, calm at its core, driven by the quiet resolve of the man at its helm. As the years passed, the harmony Napoleon Bonaparte had carefully cultivated began to fray. Europe, once in awe of his efficiency and reforms, grew wary of his expanding ambitions. Though he had long maintained a delicate balance between order and expansion, the tide of history began to shift beneath his feet. Quietly at first, then with gathering force, the wars resumed. One by one, the fragile treaties with the European powers crumbled. Napoleon responded not with hesitation, but with the same calculated precision that had brought him early success. Campaigns were planned meticulously. Battles were won with clarity and command. His grand army marched across the continent to Austria, Prussia, and beyond. For a time, his victories seemed endless. But war carries weight, and even the greatest generals must reckon with the limits of power. In 1812, Napoleon embarked on his most ambitious campaign yet, an invasion of Russia. He led his army across vast plains, through forests and rivers, chasing the shadow of an elusive victory. The march was long and silent. The Russian army withdrew steadily, refusing direct confrontation, drawing Napoleon deeper into the cold embrace of winter. Moscow, when reached, offered no triumph. The city was largely abandoned, its buildings left to smolder in flames. As winter tightened its grip, supplies dwindled. Snow and frost gnawed at the edges of uniforms, at the soles of boots. Horses collapsed in the snow, their breath rising like ghosts in the still air. Disease and exhaustion spread. The retreat that followed was slow, painful, and relentless. Only a fraction of the Grand Armée made it home. The loss was staggering, not just in numbers, but in spirit. For the first time, Napoleon's aura of invincibility dimmed. Europe saw its chance. The Sixth Coalition, a united front of nations, gathered its strength. Battles followed. Leipzig, the battle of the nations among them. French forces, though still disciplined, faced overwhelming opposition. The rhythm of war had changed. No longer was Napoleon the swift force disrupting order. Now he was the one defending it. In 1814, with Paris threatened and support waning, Napoleon abdicated the throne. His departure was quiet, lacking spectacle. He was sent into exile on the island of Elba, a small Mediterranean place of hills, olive trees, and distant horizons. There, removed from the empire he had built, he settled into a quieter life. He walked the paths above the sea, reformed local government, and observed the world through thoughtful silence. But the story did not end there. In 1815, after less than a year in exile, Napoleon returned. News of his arrival in France spread quickly. Soldiers sent to capture him instead joined his cause. Civilians welcomed him with cautious admiration. Within weeks, he had reclaimed power without firing a shot. It was a final surge, a brief 100 days of restored leadership. Yet, time had passed, and the world had moved on. At the Battle of Waterloo, fought in the soft, rain-slicked fields of Belgium, Napoleon's fate was sealed. His forces fought bravely, but the Allied armies, led by the Duke of Wellington and reinforced by Prussian troops, held firm. The battle was long and close, but in the end, decisive. Napoleon was captured and sent into a second exile, this time to the island of St. Helena, far more remote than Elba. Located in the South Atlantic Ocean, it was a place of wind and mist, of waves breaking against cliffs and isolation thick as fog. His years on St. Helena were quiet. He lived in a modest home called Longwood House, surrounded by a few loyal companions. He wrote, reflected, and sometimes walked the rocky paths overlooking the sea. No longer emperor or general, he had become a solitary figure, contemplative, removed from power, yet still holding the mind of a strategist and the bearing of a leader. He spoke of his past with clarity, never bitter, often philosophical. He accepted his fate not with regret, but with the composure of someone who understood the tides of history. In 1821, after years of declining health, Napoleon passed away at the age of 51. His body was later returned to France, buried beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides in Paris. And though he no longer walked the corridors of power or the paths of battlefields, his presence lingered in law, in governance, in the very idea of leadership molded by vision and resolve. Napoleon Bonaparte's life was not simply one of conquests or crowns. It was a journey of transformation, from a boy on a Mediterranean island to the helm of an empire, from the chaos of revolution to the calm of reform. And in the end, like all great stories, his left echoes, soft, distant, and enduring, like footsteps fading slowly into the sand. Ago, beside the calm shores of the Mediterranean Sea, a city emerged from the quiet plans of a dreamer. That dreamer was Alexander the Great, a man more often remembered for his conquests than his contemplations. Yet amid his journeys, in the year 331 BCE, he envisioned a place where cultures could meet, where East and West would blend, and where the winds carried not only ships, but also stories, thoughts, and knowledge. Called it Alexandria. Nestled along Egypt's northern coastline, Alexandria rose where land met the lapping tide. It was no ordinary city. Carefully plotted, gridded with clean lines and broad avenues, it was built to endure. Marble glistened in the sunlight, and a great lighthouse, the Pharos, would eventually rise to guide sailors home. But beyond the harbors and palaces, something more subtle, more profound, was beginning to take shape. When Alexander passed away, his vast empire was divided among his generals. One of them, Ptolemy Soter, took Egypt as his domain. He made Alexandria his capital. It was under his watchful eye that the city began to blossom as a beacon not only of trade and politics, but of learning. Ptolemy, perhaps inspired by Alexander's ambition, sought to gather knowledge from across the known world. He dreamed of a library, a sanctuary for wisdom, where scrolls from every civilization would rest side by side. A library that could house all human thought, preserving it for generations to come, not for conquest, but for quiet contemplation. Thus, the seed of the Library of Alexandria was planted. Imagine it now, in your mind's eye. A place not built overnight, but nurtured across years. The library was not merely a building, but part of a greater complex known as the Museum, a temple to the muses, those gentle spirits of art and science. It was a a place of reverence. Gardens bloomed around it. Shaded walkways crisscrossed the grounds. Within, the hush of parchment filled the air, the soft rustle of scrolls being opened, read, and copied by careful hands. Scribes traveled far to collect texts. Ships entering Alexandria's bustling harbor were often searched. Any scrolls aboard were borrowed, copied meticulously, and sometimes kept, with the copy returned. It was a peaceful pursuit, one rooted in the belief that no piece of wisdom was too small, no culture unworthy of preservation. Languages danced together on the shelves, Greek and Egyptian, Sanskrit and Hebrew, Persian and Phoenician. The walls, if they could speak, might have whispered tales from every corner of the ancient world. There was no single moment when the library was complete. It grew like a forest, one branch at a time. Its caretakers were known for their dedication. They cataloged scrolls, translated foreign texts, and corresponded with thinkers from Athens to Babylon. Each scroll a small ember of human thought, glowing softly in the quiet chambers. This vision of knowledge, not guarded but gathered, was what made Alexandria special. It became a place where scholars could walk in sandals across mosaic floors, where the stars were studied and language refined. It was a sanctuary for curiosity. And all the while, beyond its walls, the sea whispered along the shore. The waves lapped softly at the edges of the city, as if listening to the gentle hum of scholars deep in thought. Lanterns flickered as night fell, casting golden light upon papyrus and parchment. The air, warm and dry, carried the scent of ink and oil lamps. Here there was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet, unending work of preserving human experience, of translating dreams into scrolls, and scrolls into shared understanding. It is said that at its height, the library may have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, though numbers fade with time and stories often grow. But what matters more than size is the spirit, a vision of a world not yet fully understood, but always worth exploring, a belief that wisdom, once written down and cherished, could bring light, even in the darkest hours. As the city of Alexandria stretched its arms toward the sea, the library stretched its imagination toward the stars. And there, beneath the sun and beside the waves, the great journey of knowledge began, not with thunder or grandeur, but with the soft, steady turning of a scroll. Slowly through a dream, carved from stone and silence. Though no blueprint remains and no stones stand today to mark its foundation, scholars and poets through the ages have painted soft images in the mind of columns rising like trees in an endless grove of learning, of sunlight drifting through tall windows, casting long shadows over scroll-lined shelves. Let us wander gently through what it might have been. The library was said to be part of the Museion, a sanctuary devoted to the muses, those graceful daughters of memory and inspiration. In an ancient world, such a space was not merely a building, but a living temple, a peaceful academy where knowledge was not only stored, but shared, reflected upon, and cherished. The Museion was thought to be a haven for scholars, a place where they could live, eat, write, and think together, undisturbed by the clamor of daily life. The architecture likely echoed the beauty of classical design, smooth marble pillars, serene courtyards, and colonnades open to the sea breeze. Mosaic floors may have told stories in quiet color beneath the feet of wandering philosophers and mathematicians. Between tall walls, shelves held papyrus scrolls carefully organized, perhaps by subject, language, or origin. Imagine the hush that filled these rooms, not the silence of absence, but the stillness of thought. Gentle footsteps padding over polished stone, the soft scratch of a reed pen dipped in ink. From one chamber, the slow recitation of Homer's verses. From another, the rustling of papyrus being unrolled by candlelight. Here, the scrolls were not just stored. They were read, copied, compared, translated. The very walls may have absorbed centuries of ideas, quietly echoing the voices of those who had touched their surfaces with awe and purpose. Within this imagined space, scholars from every region gathered. Some wore flowing robes of Greek design, others Egyptian linen. They came not for status, but for study. They were offered food and lodging, and in return, they devoted themselves to expanding the limits of understanding. The Museum was not a place of debate or spectacle, but of gentle inquiry, where the greatest minds could ask and answer without interruption. Scrolls themselves were delicate treasures, made from papyrus reeds cut and pressed into thin sheets, then dried in the sun. They were rolled and tied with care. A single scroll might hold a poem, a theory of the stars, a treatise on medicine. Some contained forgotten languages, others preserved sacred rituals or the practical writings of faraway cities. They were stored horizontally in wooden shelves or perhaps in clay jars, each marked with a small tag, the pinax, naming its contents. The caretakers of the library, whose names we may never know, treated these scrolls with quiet reverence. They dusted them, cataloged them, and sometimes, when age demanded it, copied them anew. The organization of this knowledge was itself a scholarly task. One of the earliest librarians, Zenodotus of Ephesus, is said to have attempted a comprehensive system of classification. Later, others like Callimachus created vast bibliographies, mapping out the ocean of scrolls like constellations in a dark sky. The library wasn't merely a collection, it was a living body. Scrolls arrived constantly, some gifted, some copied from ships, others traded through delicate diplomacy. The port of Alexandria was one of the busiest in the world, and its harbor masters, under royal instruction, would borrow scrolls from travelers and merchants for duplication. These texts were then added to the collection, their wisdom preserved for generations yet to come. Wandering through the library might feel like moving through time itself. In one room, ancient Indian texts discussing medicine. In another, Egyptian astronomical tables tracing the heavens. Greek tragedies, Babylonian mathematics, Persian histories, all quietly coexisting, resting side by side in respectful silence. The library was a garden of thought, blooming with diversity, and though it held no loud celebrations or festivals, its beauty was in the quiet heartbeat of study, a beauty found in candles burning into the night, in the slight breeze that turned a loose scroll's edge, in the gaze of a scholar deep in concentration. Outside, the city hummed with life, traders shouting their prices, horses clopping over stone. But within the library's walls, the world slowed. Time stretched out like a scroll, unrolling steadily, patiently, revealing knowledge line by line. We may never know exactly what the library looked like, nor the precise number of scrolls it held, but we can sense what it stood for. It was a structure not of marble and mortar alone, but of ideals, a sanctuary of curiosity, of preservation, and of peace. In a space as serene and luminous, as the Library of Alexandria, knowledge did not simply sit on shelves. It lived through the minds and hearts of those who came to tend it, the librarians, the scholars, the caretakers of thought. They were not merely administrators or organizers. They were the quiet stewards of humanity's memory. Let us picture them not as figures of authority or renown, but as gentle keepers, walking softly through corridors of papyrus. Their footsteps echoed in vast halls, not with haste, but with reverence. Each day they awoke not to noise or urgency, but to the patient rhythm of learning, one scroll, one idea, one insight at a time. Many of these scholars were drawn from across the Mediterranean world, from Athens to Babylon, from Carthage to Cyrene they came, not for conquest nor for trade, but for curiosity. The Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt after Alexander, invited them freely, offering housing, food, and stipends, asking only that they study, write, and share what they knew. Among these guardians was Callimachus of Cyrene, a poet and scholar who devoted himself to the task of organizing the library's immense collection. He created what may be considered the world's first library catalog, the Pennikies, or tables. It was not a list hastily compiled, but a sprawling and thoughtful directory that sought to make sense of thousands upon thousands of works. Callimachus's effort wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. He believed that every text had its rightful place, a lineage, a category, a thread in the tapestry of learning. His system divided the scrolls by subject: poetry, law, medicine, mathematics, history, and more. Each entry named the author, offered a summary, and noted the scroll's origin. In doing so, he ensured that a reader's path through knowledge could be guided gently, with clarity and care. But Callimachus was not alone. Eratosthenes, another luminary who served as chief librarian, brought the stars and the earth into the library's embrace. He is known for calculating the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy, using nothing more than shadows, mathematics, and reason. In Alexandria, he mapped the heavens and charted the globe, proving that even without modern tools, the mind could stretch across vast distances. Other scholars like Aristarchus pondered the movements of celestial bodies. He suggested that the earth orbited the sun, a thought so bold, so far ahead of its time, that it would not be widely accepted for centuries. Yet, within the library's calm halls, such ideas could bloom safely, away from judgment or fear. The library did not demand agreement. It welcomed questions. Disagreement was not punished, but explored. Ideas met not in conflict, but in conversation. To listen to the scholars of Alexandria was to hear 100 voices, each seeking truth in their own way, and finding beauty in the seeking. Teachers recited Homer by heart. Physicians studied anatomy and herbal remedies. Linguists compared ancient dialects. Historians recorded tales of empires lost to time. Each one contributed a thread to the library's grand fabric, gently weaving the knowledge of civilizations into a shared whole. The guardians of the library worked not for fame or recognition, but for the joy of preservation. Their tools were simple: reed pens, ink made from soot, blades to trim papyrus, and oil lamps to illuminate their scrolls deep into the night. Their hands may have been stained with ink, their eyes perhaps weary from reading, but their minds wandered through continents and centuries, and they were not all men. Though history often forgets them, it is likely that women, poets, scribes, and philosophers played quiet roles within the library's story. In ancient Egypt, women were often literate and respected in scholarly circles. Their voices may have echoed softly within the library's chambers, contributing wisdom that was carefully stored among the scrolls. To walk through this world of scholars is to feel a gentle pulse of dedication. There were no applause, no grand speeches, no medals, only the slow, sacred work of recording and reflecting. Each scroll, a small miracle of effort and care, each idea, a light kept burning. The library was not guarded by walls alone, but by intention, by the belief that knowledge, once shared, becomes eternal, that even in the hush of a quiet chamber, the thoughts of countless minds could meet, overlap, and grow. As we leave this part of the story behind, we do so with gratitude. Gratitude for those who quietly gave their lives to protect and expand the human experience. They did not build monuments or lead armies, but they guarded something just as precious, the memory of who we are and who we might become. The moment to imagine what rested within the shelves of the Library of Alexandria. Not shelves of wood as we know them, but perhaps open niches carved into walls or wooden cabinets, carefully designed to cradle rolled scrolls of papyrus. These scrolls, gentle to the touch and aged with time, contained more than just ink. They carried voices, ideas, dreams whispered across generations. The library is believed to have housed anywhere from 40,000 to over 400,000 scrolls, though no one knows the exact number. It may have been the greatest archive of ancient writing ever assembled in one place. These were not just Egyptian works, nor only Greek. The library welcomed knowledge from every corner of the known world. There were scrolls from India filled with observations of the stars and teachings of spiritual wisdom. There were Babylonian tablets transcribed into Greek, recounting centuries of astronomy, mathematics, and governance. Persian treatises on ethics, medicine, and the cycles of the moon found their way here. Even the philosophies of China may have brushed the walls of the library, traveling over land and sea through merchants and emissaries. Among the scrolls, myths danced beside mathematics. A treatise on geometry might rest beside a tragic play. A physician's guide to herbal remedies could be nestled next to a scroll on music theory. In the library's embrace, no field of study stood above another. All were part of the human experience. All were worthy of preservation. Many scrolls were originals, gifted by foreign leaders or copied with care from ancient sources. When ships arrived in the bustling port of Alexandria, officials had a curious task: to borrow scrolls from travelers, merchants, and diplomats, then copy them meticulously in the library's scriptoriums. The originals were sometimes kept and the copies returned. It was not done with malice, but with a sense of urgency, a quiet desire to let no knowledge slip through their finger. Imagine scribes bent over low desks, working by the soft glow of oil lamps. Their reed pens moved slowly across the papyrus, each stroke deliberate, their eyes trained to preserve every curve of a character, every nuance of an accent or punctuation mark. The process was not fast, but it was patient, an act of devotion. They were not merely copying words. They were transmitting lifetimes of understanding. In Alexandria, writing was seen as a bridge, not just across space, but through time. A poet's lament from centuries past could stir the heart of a reader today. A physician's careful case notes might save a life in lands yet undiscovered. The scrolls whispered gently of a truth often forgotten, that we are part of a story far larger than ourselves. Many of these works no longer exist, The scrolls, made of papyrus, were fragile and sensitive to time and climate, and yet their echoes live on. They survive in the thoughts they inspired, in the works they influenced, and in the lineage of ideas passed down through generations. Among the scrolls may have been lost plays by Euripides, full of subtle wisdom and reflection. There may have been forgotten treatises by Anaximander or Hipparchus, exploring the earth's shape or the movements of stars. There could have been verses penned by unknown women, their voices otherwise lost to history, now faint but present in spirit. Some believe that the works of Homer and Hesiod were compared line by line in Alexandria, with scholars compiling the most faithful versions for posterity. Others suggest that Aristotle's private collection, once vast and precious, was brought to the library after his death, offering glimpses into the birth of logic, politics, and biology. To be in that space, surrounded by these scrolls, must have felt like standing at the center of a vast ocean of thought. One did not need to sail across the seas to explore distant worlds. With each unrolling of a scroll, new vistas opened, slowly and gently. In that sacred stillness, time unfolded. And yet, what made the scrolls powerful was not only the knowledge they contained, but the reverence with which they were treated. Each was not simply a record, but a presence, a memory of a thinker, a breath of the past. The Library of Alexandria was not a museum of lifeless texts. It was a living ecosystem of learning. Ideas were not kept still. They moved, collided, transformed. Scholars debated them softly. Students reflected upon them. Writers responded to them with scrolls of their own. Tonight, as we consider the thousands of scrolls that once filled those rooms, we may find comfort in knowing that knowledge, even when scattered, finds new paths. The ideas of Alexandria did not disappear entirely. Like seeds scattered by a breeze, they took root elsewhere, flowering in different lands, in different centuries, in different minds. The story of the Library of Alexandria does not end with its halls, nor with the scrolls nestled in the quiet chambers of learning. Its true legacy is something less tangible yet more enduring, a presence that whispers through the corridors of history and the libraries of today. Though we often speak of the library in terms of its loss, perhaps it is more soothing to see it as a beginning. A seed planted long ago to continue to grow, unseen by the eyes, but felt by the soul. The dream of Alexandria was never truly extinguished. It merely changed form. We do not know the exact day the last scroll was read. No precise record tells us when its doors last opened to a scholar seeking truth. The decline, as many historians believe, was slow and spread across centuries, a gradual fading rather than a single moment of flame or ruin. Perhaps there was once a caretaker who returned to a quiet hall and found it dimmer than before, fewer scholars arriving, a scroll missing here, a damaged cabinet there, dust settling in corners where once the feet of eager learners had brushed it away. The silence growing thicker. Empires rose and fell. The Ptolemies gave way to Roman hands, and the Romans too shifted with the tides of politics, culture, and faith. The ancient ways changed. New centers of thought emerged in Constantinople, in Baghdad, in monasteries across Europe. The flame that Alexandria had kindled passed on to other hands, other hearts. And yet, even in the quiet, Alexandria's essence lingered. Its greatest gift may not have been the scrolls themselves, but the idea they represented, that knowledge is worth seeking, that wisdom is worth preserving, that the act of learning is in itself a kind of peace. Imagine someone today, a student in a distant land, curled up late at night, poring over a book by soft lamplight, or a scientist quietly examining patterns and data drawn by the same curiosity that moved astronomers thousands of years ago, or a poet writing words that seek to capture the fleeting beauty of thought. All are, in some way, walking within the library's shadow. Many modern libraries trace their inspiration to Alexandria, the Library of Pergamon, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the great collections of the Renaissance, even the vast digital repositories of today filled with books, papers, and ideas are echoes of that ancient dream. And in 2002, a new light was lit on the same Mediterranean shore, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina. Built near the presumed site of the original, it stands not as a replica, but as a tribute, a continuation of the idea. Its curved walls and sunlit halls welcome people from all nations. It speaks not of loss, but of renewal. Still, the original library's mystery endures. Its presence can be felt in our yearning to know more, to recover what was lost, in our curiosity about ancient sciences, forgotten philosophies, and vanished voices. That longing, too, is part of its legacy. Perhaps, in some unseen way, the library continues to exist, not in stone or scroll, but in memory, in the way we honor stories, in the reverence we give to learning, in the quiet hours we spend in thought, in reflection, or in study. In those moments, the library is alive. It is in the hush of a reading room, the turning of a page, the gentle hush of words softly spoken in the night. It's in every person who ever asked why and went seeking the answer with care. As you lie in bed tonight, listening to this tale, know that you too are part of this story. Your calm attention, your peaceful reflection are threads in a much older tapestry. The library was built not just of stone or scrolls, but of people. People who believed that learning was an act of hope. So rest now, knowing that the spirit of Alexandria is still here. It lives in your curiosity. It sleeps in your dreams. And as night wraps the world in its quiet embrace, the library too rests, gently, patiently, waiting for the next mind to wander through its halls. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with wonder.